introductions.
And there we go. We're live.
We are live. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. While we wait for everyone to log in, I want to introduce myself and the panelists from the National Volunteer Fire Council, as well as an outline of today's events. My name is Kevin Quinn. I'm the first vice chair of the National Volunteer Fire Council. I'm also a retired deputy chief in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, and I currently am responding on as a firefighter, not a deputy chief any longer. So, but I want to introduce my pleasure to introduce our panelists. I'm joined today by Dr. Eduardo Dolhun, the creator of DripDrop Oral Rehydration Solution, Ali Rothrock, who's the CEO of On the Job and Off, a provider for behavioral health training and emergency responders and departments, and Brian McQueen, who is our NVFC's director out of New York. He's on the NVFC Executive Committee, and he's the chair of the National Volunteer Fire Council's Cancer Subcommittee. I want to also thank our sponsor, Dr. Dolhun and DripDrop ORS for today's discussion and the fact that they are providing a dehydration solution to high-risk populations, which certainly includes firefighters. So thank you, Doctor, for your sponsorship as well. I'd like to introduce the NVFC. For those that do not know, we are the leading and the only voice of Volunteers in America. We're a lead nonprofit membership representing those voices, those volunteers, those 760,000 volunteers across the United States. We also provide training, education, advocacy, and programs that will help the volunteer emergency services. If you're not a member of the NVFC, I want to encourage you to join. It's $18 a year, and it's a great value. Our NVFC virtual classroom and access to volunteer voices, among other resources, is exceptional. So consider joining us. I want to frame the discussion today, taking place each year. The third full week in June every year is the Firefighter Safety Stand Down, where we highlight critical safety, health, and survival issues of the fire and emergency services. Departments are asked to suspend all non-emergency activities during that week and to focus on the attention of safety and health of their volunteers and their firefighters. This year's events will take place June 20 to the 26th with the theme of Rebuild Rehab, which focuses on the critical importance of physical and psychological rehab to mitigate the psychological, physiological, and all the aspects of firefighters and the hydration key component. And today's discussion will revolve around three key aspects of this theme: hydration, covered by Dr. Dolhun; exposure risk reduction, covered by Brian; the psychological well-being, covered by Ali. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we move along, or raise your hand or signify one other means on this platform. So we'd like to begin with Dr. Dolhun, and I'll ask a few questions, Doctor, and you can kind of respond, and then I'll be monitoring along with Matt Odom from the NVFC office if there are any other follow-up questions as we go. Dr. Dolhun, we know dehydration is a serious concern for firefighters, especially after an intense training or during a long incident, such as a structure fire, a wildfire, or anything else that's going to take us on the job for a while. A comprehensive rehab program needs to include and provide for dehydration relief to counter the health benefits of losing so much fluid. Doctor, could you briefly explain why dehydration is a serious health risk and what could happen if severe dehydration goes unchecked?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, dehydration is a universal issue for any human being, especially when they're vulnerable, either at the ends of life and when they're ill, and extreme conditions and environments such as extreme endurance events. I look at firefighters like athletes, where they're in a high stress situation, not just psychologically stressful, but physically stressful. And this and the environments that firefighters work in is are very unique because of the temperatures and the gear that firefighters wear, setting you up for two major conditions that the military is interested in as well. One is heat-related illnesses, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and then hyponatremia, meaning low sodium in the blood. Maintaining proper hydration is essential to avoiding heat-related illnesses and hyponatremia. Why is that important? It's important because, one, if your core temperature goes up, your physical stamina goes down, your reflexes go down, and your acumen, your mental acuity is altered. There are situations I'm sure you're all very familiar with that can greatly put you at risk if you don't react quickly, either getting in and out of a building or moving ladders, that kind of thing. You're dealing with very, very heavy equipment and dangerous situations. So reaction time can be improved with appropriate hydration. And then lose the gallons of water, of fluid you lose are key. If you just rehydrate with water or sports drinks, which are now known not to have enough electrolytes, mainly sodium, you'll suffer from hyponatremia. So it feels good to drink cold water. It feels good to drink sports drinks. But what happens is over time, your sodium level goes down and can have the very same effects of dehydration, right? So that's what we're trying to fight. Keep your core temperature down through the volume, the fluid, and keep your sodium concentration optimal by having enough electrolytes in the solution.
Very good. Thank you, Doctor. May I add a follow-up? What are the hidden signs of dehydration that firefighters should watch out for?
Hidden sign, you'll become weaker, slower, fatigued. You may get confused. If you get confused in the middle of a burning building, it's a big deal. So those are oftentimes easy to recognize, but also cramping is another sign of progressive dehydration. If it continues or the hyponatremia continues, then you can actually go into delirium. You get really confused, and if it really progresses, you can get seizures, and extreme endurance athletes have even died. And that's also occurred in the military. So these are the signs and symptoms. So pre-hydrating is key. Loading up with enough sodium and fluid prior to fighting, because it takes there's an immediate aspect of rehydration, and then there's a longer aspect to it.
So some form of a regimen where the firefighters are taking their own health and pre-hydrating so that they're consistently ready for that job or that jolt or whatever that alarm comes in.
Right. You'll get an immediate effect by drinking DripDrop, for example, and then there's a delayed effect. So the elite athletes and military guys say, okay, if I'm going to go, I know I'm going to be active at noon. I want to start pre-hydrating 3 hours before. Any time you can do it before you get there, the better. So, we generally say 1 to 3 hours prior to the event.
And so for me, for instance, and the other volunteers on here, it really becomes a lifestyle change where we should be pre-hydrating on a consistent basis, probably throughout the day. Would that be recommended?
Yeah, that would be. And you can also hydrate. You don't always need an oral rehydration solution like DripDrop. If you're in the firehouse or at home and you're eating a pizza, pizzas are loaded with salt. Drink water at that time. In order to hydrate, you have to truly hydrate. You have to pair water and salt at the same time. So simultaneous administration of both of them. Chicken soup, which it's too much during the fire, but if in the comfort of your home, chicken soup, miso soup work really well. If you like hamburgers or burgers, all these, or hot dogs, all these things that have a lot of sodium, drink an extra glass or two of water with the meal.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me ask this. How does dehydration prevent, let me start over. How does dehydration prevention treatment or prevention differ from heat-related illnesses such as hyponatremia?
How does, that's a great question. So what, in the mid-century, in about 1970s, the running revolution started. The US Army did a lot of research, and we said, we really began to tackle heat-related illnesses. And so we said, well, just start drinking. And we don't exactly know where it came from, but people said, well, drink before you're even thirsty. So we just used to drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. And then we found out that if you keep sweating, when you sweat, you lose salt and water, right? You lose sodium and water. If you just replace the water, your sodium level gets down. That's how you get low sodium, natremia, hyponatremia. And so the key is always pairing that together. And the beauty of an oral rehydration solution is that you address both the heat and the sodium loss in one solution. And basically, I mean, IV therapy is kind of seen as a failure of the system. So if you're now you're confused, you're unconscious, you've fallen, you're going to get an IV. An IV is just really salty water. There's no magic to it. It's like, so, you can prevent the whole catastrophe of an IV by pre-hydrating and hydrating, during the event with an appropriate solution.
I had a question come in. Edward B asked, what is your opinion on salt tablets?
That's a great question. Salt tablets were used by the U.S. military, the British military for over a century. That's fine if you do salt and water. There you can mix, and combine things. I mean, I'm writing a book right now. I have a United States Marine Corps canteen and the little bottles of salt tablets, but 2 per canteen, during the Pacific campaign. So yeah, doesn't matter how you get it. Usually most oral rehydration solutions taste really awful, so the troops don't like to drink it. But I call it like the Mary Poppins effect. A teaspoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Right. And so we found out that in 1965 that if you pair salt, water, and a little bit of sugar, this whole system is catapulted forward in the body, and that's now what is sort of codified as an oral rehydration solution, and it works really, really well together. But yeah, absolutely, you can use salt tablets.
But DripDrop tastes so much better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm heavily biased, but I think it's the most sophisticated rehydration product in the world.
All right, so what is ORS and how does it treat dehydration? I think you answered some of that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's IV therapy and then there's oral therapy. IV, they couldn't, 100 years ago, everybody in the United States said, well, let's try to get oral rehydration therapy going because it makes sense. It's portable, everybody can use it, you can take it home, but they didn't get the right balance. It didn't work out. So we just put all of our resources into IV, and that became the dominant form of rehydration in American healthcare. But as the world grew and we started seeing disastrous situations, it's not portable. There are a lot of drawbacks to IV. You need skilled labor to put it in. You can miss the site. It's really hard to stick a dehydrated person, oftentimes, especially babies. So what folks around the world did, mainly in the developing world, so we call this a reverse technology product. So Bangladesh, the Philippines, where kids were dying at a very, very high rate. Mid-century, we had over 5 million children dying every year, age 4 and under, 5 million. And they said, well, this is just unconscionable. We have to do something about it. So they started working on it and really looking at the studies that the studies were done to look at really how does digestion work in a stressed individual, whether it's a high performance athlete, a firefighter, or a sick child. And they all work the same. And what was found was that there is this pathway called the sodium glucose cotransport system, the only one that's not knocked out by cholera, something we don't see in the US, but still prevalent around the world, and was a big killer of women, men, children, and men as early as 1910 in New York City. So it's a big deal disease. That pathway, the sodium glucose cotransport system, is the only pathway left standing, and that's the life-saving door by which we save lives today. So oral rehydration therapy, distributed by UNICEF and the World Health Organization in 1980, plummeted the deaths of young children down to about 750,000, down from 5 million a day. And it's that technology that companies like Gatorade leverage. The original Gatorade in 1965 was a true ORS, but getting it to the world, they found out the taste barrier would not make it a viable commercial product. So they decreased the sodium and increased the sugar. Sports drinks are better than water in these situations, but ORS is much better. It's a whole level above that. When you pair oral rehydration therapy with IV, it actually outperforms. It's faster because you can begin like pretty much no side effects, and it's safe. So the only times you can't use it is if you're going to surgery, you're unconscious, or there's obviously your bowel has stopped working. That's oral rehydration therapy.
Great. And when we look at the firefighter safety stand down and our theme as rehab, rebuild, rehab, that's really it's a new thought process for us as firefighters, because we knew we had to prehydrate, but that to us probably meant water. And it's clearly what you're saying is it has to be both. It has to be both. So great messaging. Thank you so much. Let me move to Brian. Brian, as a survivor of cancer and the co-author of the Lavender Ribbon Report, you understand better than most how significant a risk of cancer is in our nation's firefighters and the importance of taking action during and after an incident to minimize the risks. A comprehensive rehab program must include steps to provide firefighters from toxins and carcinogens. My question to you first, Brian, is could you briefly explain the risk exposure, how it poses to emergency responders, and why reducing the risk is so important?
Sure, I'd be glad to, Chief. I really appreciate that. But first of all, I'd like to share with the doctor that we use DripDrop religiously after our live burns and structure fires, and it's been a major impact on our firefighters and the ability for them to perform, being volunteer firefighters with limited time and limited recruitment and retention. So we appreciate what you've done, Doctor, and our fire department does the same.
Hats off. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's really focus on, the health effects of exposures related to firefighting has really been a long-term major interest to occupational health investigators. And this really came about probably about 7 or 8 years ago when the increase in cancer amongst firefighters, career and volunteer, were on the increase. And they're starting to find out, they were when they did the research, is that firefighters are exposed to serious chemicals and physical hazards to a degree that is unusual in a modern workforce. It's completely different than when you go to work in an office or you're working from home or whatever. The level of exposure experienced by a firefighter in a given fire depends on many things. First of all, what's burning, the combustion characteristics of the fire, the measures taken to control the fire, whether it's going to be a, interior, exterior attack, time of day, the weather, the presence of victims that may need rescue, and the adrenaline that flow that's found in firefighters when we know and we hear entrapment into a structure fire, and the position of the line of duty that a firefighter held in that rescue, in that firefighting objective that they had to solve. So firefighters on the scene of a fire are frequently exposed to chemicals such as carbon monoxide, hydrogen, cyanide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen chloride, and such organic compounds as benzene. But before arriving on the scene, some firefighters, especially in the older fire stations now that do not have air vented systems, is that they were impacted by the diesel exhaust films and that sit on their gear prior to them putting on. And then once they sweat because of the fire and the action and the activity that they're doing, the chemicals soak dermally into their bodies. So sometimes what we fail to recognize are the thousands of chemicals that are used in products of construction in our newer homes, basically around 82,000 chemicals in the building industry today. The homes of today are much different than the homes 20 and 30 years ago when you could have walked into a bedroom fire with a water can and put that fire out. There's more plastics, there's more glues, there's more technology. The fire retardant materials now impact the health and safety of our firefighters. So there's just so many variables that, really are starting to come to the forefront thanks to the 7 years that we've been studying it.
All right, Brian, well, thank you for that. Let me ask you, Brian, as well. What are some strategies and methods emergency responders and fire departments can use to reduce exposure risk, especially as part of the rehab process?
Sure. Fire departments are increasingly putting into practice best practice strategies, that they're finding from the research that's been done through the NVFC, Northwell Health out of New York City, the International Association of Fire Chiefs. They're realizing now that the importance to mitigate these exposures to the carcinogens is life-saving, focusing on both the inhalation and the dermal exposure, and the importance of wearing your self-contained breathing apparatus throughout the entire process. Some of the things that, departments are looking at right now are increased use of self-contained breathing apparatus, even during the overhaul, which you never saw. Use of self-contained breathing apparatus in fire investigation operations, which we used to never see. More rapid dermal decontamination at the fire scene. I think that's crucial. I always tell, when I go around the United States and talk about cancer in the fire service, I always tell about the story of my son when I used to bring him to school, to elementary school, and we had a structure fire one night, and I just threw my gear. I was a chief at that time. I just threw my gear in the back of my SUV, and my son says to me, "Dad, it smells like there's a fire in here." And never did I think that, a fire is off gas 72 hours after a fire, and here I was actually exposing him to these chemicals, and it's just something that, you don't realize until you actually come down with cancer and you think about it, you do some research. Post-fire personal protective equipment is important. Decontaminating your firefighter gear, taking a shower after a fire, not wearing your turnout gear into your living avenues in your stations, into your kitchen areas and things like that. And in addition, some fire departments are even putting in saunas within their department to help bring those chemicals outside of their bodies. So what's encouraging is over the past 6 years, there's been some major improvements, and it's been a team approach. And the cancer initiatives that fire departments are starting to incorporate within their stations are crucial to life-saving and to retaining firefighters within their departments. Thanks to associations like the NVFC, the IAFC, VCOS, the NFFF, the FRCE, cancer continues to be a priority in their health initiatives. On June 17th at 7 p.m., a joint NVFC and VCOS webinar will be held, sharing actual department initiatives that have been very successful in implementing the Lavender Ribbon Reports. And that's going to be one that we have 3 outstanding leaders in the fire service that will be sharing what works for them. So I think that's going to be one that 7 o'clock on June 17th, I'll even be sitting in on.
Great, great. I know, Brian, you hit on a number of topics in the Lavender Ribbon Report. Can you give a brief overview of the Lavender Ribbon Report and how it can better protect us in the fire service?
Sure. The Lavender Ribbon Report was a joint effort. It was really a thought process of past Chief James Seavey Sr. And his ability to bring 2 organizations together, the International Association of Fire Chiefs through VCOS and the NVFC. And it was his charge to be able to put the cancer initiative in the forefront of those 2 associations. A group of career and volunteer firefighters each took a best practice and wrote a section of it. There were 11 of them. When we think about it, just washing your gear, just taking a shower within the hour, and in your part, Kevin, making sure that you're going to get a physical, a good physical that you know as well as I do, saves people's lives as it did for yours. So these are just some of the important things. But, we didn't want to stop there. We take a look back and we have our second revision Lavender Ribbon Report meetings, and we take a look back where we were back in 2018 and where we are now. And, kudos to the people that have really taken hold of the Lavender Ribbon Report and have used it. You are making a difference. There's no question about it. These best practices focus on the issues for boots on the ground firefighters and what they face every single day, and how to take care of themselves. Because when they walk out that door, whether to go home from a call in a volunteer fire department or to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning after they do a 24-hour shift, they're going home to a family, and they want to make sure they're going home and providing a healthy atmosphere for them as well. So what's important is the NVFC and VCOS have looked at the original Lavender Ribbon Report and now are finalizing a second revision of the Lavender Ribbon Report, which focuses on success stories, stories that have saved people's lives, ones that have the systems that are working within stations now, and we're focusing on that. And we hope to have that, hitting the finally print it and hitting some of these trade shows around the 1st of August.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I know going back, probably 8 years or so, when we did start this conversation jointly started the conversation, because the cancer in the fire service really brought together the entire fire service, career and volunteer and everything else combination. So appreciate the work you've done on that. And we look forward to hearing more on the 17th from those that have implemented the Lavender Ribbon Report and have some great results. So
absolutely, Kevin. And just one other thing that's going to be included in the Lavender Ribbon Report, the second revision this time, is the in-depth study that Northwell Health did on the volunteer firefighters in New York. Yeah. And there's some very alarming statistics in there that really gives us more reason about why we should implement these best practices. Right. But I appreciate that, Kev. Thanks.
All right, and so I want to remind those that are on, if you have a question for Brian on any of what Brian's sharing, or if Dr. Dolhun, if you have a question, we still will follow up on those questions as we go. At this time, I'd like to bring Ali into the mix, and thank you, Ali, for joining us. You do so much for the fire service. With a lot of departments considering rehab for the physical health, and they forgot about the mental health components that are responding to those tough calls. You're one of the experts in the field, and you've worked so well with the NVFC. However, a comprehensive rehab program must also factor on the importance of the mental health and make sure that responders have the support and the resources they need, as well as their family members, that for psychological well-being. So you, Ali, as the one of the experts in the field, let me ask you, how can the work emergency responders do negatively impact their psychological health?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks to the NVFC for hosting this conversation. I feel like it's always important to say that, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about the negative impacts of the emergency services on first responders, especially from the mental health perspective. But I do believe that the positive impacts so outweigh some of the negative, but we have to be proactive and paying attention to some of the barriers that exist, or the impacts that we're maybe not paying attention to, that are impacting first responders. And I really think there are 4 reasons why first responders could have their mental health negatively impacted by the job, volunteer career, whatever. And I think the first reason is, first and foremost, there's a chronic exposure to trauma based on our job description. No one calls 911 because that bad thing didn't happen or almost happened. You know, even though we do get those calls that we sort of roll our eyes and think this isn't an emergency, by nature of our job, we are seeing when bad things happen to people. And so that chronic exposure to that can definitely wear on our minds if we are not aware of it. I think the second reason is constant or frequent sleep disruption, or sleep deprivation. Volunteers might have it a little bit easier where, you know, we can turn our pagers off, or maybe only one night a week we have to be really paying attention, or maybe we have our pagers on all the time and we're hearing what's going on constantly. And especially from the career side, that sleep deprivation or that sleep disruption wreaks havoc on every aspect of our minds and our bodies, and really prevents the restorative activities that take place in our bodies when we get deep sleep. And so when that is constantly disrupted, that's going to have kind of a cascading effect on other facets of our lives. I also think the culture is a big piece. When I started talking about first responders' mental health 15 years ago, 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of people interested in listening, at least not in the circles that I was in at the time. And we've seen, even in the last 5 years, this huge shift in the culture of the emergency services, even being willing to have the conversation about first responders' mental health. And then the fourth piece, I think, is a lack of tailored resources. It's resources not really existing that are specific for first responders. And that's why the work that I do, I'm so passionate about it, because it's, you know, mental health resources created by first responders for first responders. And so I think those 4 pieces, the chronic exposure to trauma, the effect on sleep, the culture, and the lack of tailored resources, are like the 4 reasons that a first responder's mental health could be impacted.
Great information. Thank you, Ali. Let me follow up. What is the psychological health and mental well-being so important, especially when it comes to emergency responders?
It is so incredibly critical to be aware of our own mental health. First of all, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. I think sometimes we say, like, oh, that person has mental health, meaning they're struggling with their mental health, but we all have mental health, just like we have physical health. Sometimes we have, you know, days where we have a headache or we feel sluggish or whatever. We're noticing our physical health is being impacted. We should be noting our mental health the exact same way. And so just like in the emergency services, we don't really do anything from a reactive standpoint. Like, we don't show up on scene and like draw straws for who's going to put the fire out or who's going to cut someone out of a car. We prepare for that ahead of time. The mental health aspect of it has to be the exact same. So we have to be willing to put stuff in place, put these systems of resilience into the foundation of our organizations. So when something happens, when something big happens, our responders have the resources that they need. But also, we need organizations that are more willing to look at the cumulative effects of sort of little drops of stress, like the shift work, the sleep disruption, COVID-19 pandemic, these things that are sort of in our day-to-day always. We have to be willing to look at kind of all of those aspects if we're going to create or sort of evolve the culture that exists now to a place where mental health is much more talked about.
I know it's easier for me as a firefighter to recognize the health things that are physiological. It's not as easy to recognize the mental health or my well-being. Any strategies on how to do that check-in?
Well, the first, I ask all first responders the same 2 questions, whether I'm interacting with them in a critical incident stress management capacity, checking in with a firefighter friend. And those 2 questions are, how are you sleeping? And how are you eating? Because when our minds are preoccupied to the point of affecting our sleep and affecting our appetite, that tells me that a first responder is being significantly impacted by something. If you're feeling like I've been a little bit more stressed than normal this week for XYZ reason, but I'm still sleeping well, I still have my normal appetite, that is a great sign for you to know, okay, my positive coping skills are working. I'm able to find restorative rest in other areas of my life. I am managing this, whatever this is. But if you're noticing that your sleep is being affected, your appetite is being affected, your mood is being affected, that is an indication that you need an additional positive coping skill or you need an additional resource, which could be calling up a firefighter friend that, you know, has been on the job for a while and you think has probably felt some similar things. That could be calling up a counselor, a therapist, a parent, a friend, whatever it is. So that's kind of my metric for gauging how people are doing, and you can use that metric on yourself too.
And I think that metric fits in well with the firefighter safety stand-up theme of rebuilding rehab. You know, asking those two questions, it really is rebuilding and rehabbing. So very good. Another question, Ali. What are some strategies that departments and members, emergency responders can use during rehab to support psychological well-being?
That's a great question. And it's not one that I think people think of often. And I'm thinking now about an incident that I responded to from a critical incident stress management perspective. So I wasn't there as a firefighter, I was there as a crisis counselor. And this incident was one that took place a couple of years ago. It was right before Christmas. And it was a fire where two young boys, two brothers were killed in this fire. And as that is, you know, a crime scene, that was a lot of different agencies working together, sheriff's office, coroner. It was going to be a prolonged event, and first responders are going to have a prolonged exposure to that trauma. And so it was freezing. And so the local EMS agency brought out this huge tent that kind of looked like a bounce house that could be heated from the inside. And it was enclosed on all sides to keep the heat in, right? But what that also did, while keeping us warm, was it provided a barrier, a visual barrier for first responders from the burned up house. It was across the street in the neighbor's front yard, but you could step into that and sort of get a break from the scene. And when I think about that question, I think about how we could implement a similar effect, even if you don't have a warming tent. You know, if you're in, if it's a rehab tent, there's going to be chairs where firefighters are going to come in to sit. Face the chairs away from the incident. You know as well as I do, even if I'm sitting in a chair in rehab and I can still see what's going on, I'm going to be looking, I'm going to be seeing, you know, what's up, what's happening. So even just getting that visual break is going to give our brain the beginning moments to start to process what we experienced. And so I think that's really critical, along with all the other things that we need to be taking care of for our physical bodies. In rehab, there's a lot more that can be done. And don't be afraid to call peer support. Don't be afraid to call CISM. I have responded to the scene on lots of different incidents. And while a scene is still active or while it's still a crime scene and there's investigations that people are a part of, there's not like long-winded conversations that are going to happen. But for me, in those times, I was in the rehab tent as someone who has done that exact job, as someone who understands the job, and I was able to just start to check in with people, get people a water, get people a cold towel, a hot chocolate, a coffee, whatever it was. And so if there's a situation where it's going to be a prolonged incident, especially if it was a fatality and there's a rehab tent, don't be afraid to have some of these resources in that exact environment to start to get those responders familiar with those people in case they need to contact them in the future.
All right, well, appreciate that, Ali. I think there's more of a focus of late on our mental health and well-being, but we still have huge numbers of suicides in the emergency response area. And we have so much more work to do. So we thank you for your commitment and what you do for the fire service.
You're very
and also
welcome.
your service itself.
Thanks.
I did have a couple of questions that came in. And if anyone has a question for Ali on any of the mental health and well-being, behavioral health, please send it into the chat, or for Dr. Dolhun or even Brian again. But Brian, there was a question that came up, and the question was, what is the best way for me to carry my gear in my personal vehicle? My gear is always in my vehicle.
One of the easiest things to do is make sure we decon it before we put it in your vehicle, for one thing. And the other thing is to make sure it's sealed in a hermetically sealed type of a container that keeps the off-gassing within that container. But biggest thing is decon it before you put it in any container in your vehicle.
Okay, thank you. There were a couple other questions that did come through. I think Brian already answered
I did.
one there through the chat. At this point, does anyone else have any other questions for any of our panelists? I want to make sure that we take that opportunity to get your answers. I do want to thank Dr. Dolhun, Brian McQueen, and Ali Rothrock. Ali, for your commitment and what you do for the fire service, and looking at these three modules, if you will, of how we are able to give great advice. In terms of the, rebuilding rehab, when you take a look at the theme of safety stand down, really taking the advice of that ORS systems, and rather than dealing with an IV therapy, let's go for doing something in terms of proactive rather than reactive. In terms of the Lavender Ribbon Report and all the work that we've done in cancer in the fire service, cancer is probably going to take over as our leading cause of death, taking over from heart disease probably in the next year, I'm going to guess, or two. So we need to do something to reduce the exposures and the carcinogens, and what we can do to protect our firefighters. And then the well-being, the behavioral health, and our mental well-being, and what we have to do to protect each other, and be able to maybe ask those couple of questions that make a lot of sense. So I appreciate the work that you all do for the fire service and beyond, and for these products that come through on just to make our jobs that much better. As Dr. Dolhun said, we put ourselves in extreme situations as firefighters. We need to kind of prepare better for that. And there is a method that we could utilize to best prepare and be proactive. So I don't see any other questions. I'll let just a wrap up. Dr. Dolhun, if you want to give a final statement or two, I'll go through the panel one more time.
One, it's an honor to be here with all of you. I learned a lot from the panelists. One connection with mental health that we found in the last few years that connects it to dehydration, chronic dehydration, is that you get mood disorders, irritability by being chronically dehydrated. Sleep is crucial. In medicine, we're really advocating for better and better quality sleep. So I think what Ali said is fantastic. And another way we found truck drivers and folks, the Air Force and Navy pilots that use our product, they like it because when you drink water or sports drinks, you have to go to the bathroom. So one way to get a better night's sleep is, and if you do drink a drip drop, you don't have to go to the bathroom as much. Right, and look at you're contaminating all these thousands of chemicals. That's another issue, right? Of not having to urinate in the middle of a fire, and you can't decon, you got to go back. So yeah, that's it, and we're really honored to be a part of helping all you do. Very important work. Thank you for putting your lives on the line to keep us safe. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Doctor, because of your support, your invention here, and just the fact that DripDrop ORS exists because of your commitment to helping others and saving lives. So thank you very much.
And one last thing I forgot. So I went to Haiti. I was there 3.5 days after the earthquake, and I will always be in gratitude to firemen, because it was the military guys and firemen that helped me in Haiti, saving babies. And the firemen were right there. So to all firemen around the world, I have a deep respect for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you
Kevin,
very much.
Hey, Kevin, I just want to add something, and I'm sure Ellie probably wants to chime in on this one too, because of her background. But, there's some research being done now and some things that are being discussed now about the exposure and the toll that it takes on individuals, families, both in relations to adverse health impacts and the emotional strain. And, life-threatening illness has recently been recognized as a stressor that can precipitate post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's more and more information coming out about that. You know, we talk about that, the aspects of cancer experience that might trigger that would be, you know, the diagnosis, the pain from the, you know, the word that the doctor says you have cancer, and the physical issues that you're going to be facing, the tests and the treatments that you have to go through, you know, the test results, long hospital stays or treatments, the cancer, you know, the fear that the cancer is going to come back. I'm going to tell you my story. There never a day goes by when I don't feel the left side of my neck. A few times making sure every day that that lump is never there again. And even some nights, you know, when I can't sleep, I'll lay in bed and I'll look up at the ceiling and I image the intensified modulated radiation therapy machine going over one side and back another, you know, wondering, you know, will it ever come back? Will I ever see my, you know, my family again? And I lay in bed and I pray to God every night that, you know, cancer does stay out of my body. But, you know, in August, I go back again to New York City for my scans, and, you know, just ask my wife, August will be the worst day of my life this year.
All right, Brian. Well, thank you. And we just look forward for an encouragement for you and those tests that are forthcoming. I also want to thank everyone on the call today who joined us. We hope you found this discussion useful and interesting. As a reminder, Safety Stand Down Week is June 20 to 26th, and Rebuild Rehab is the theme. And you heard some great resources here today. So hopefully you'll be able to apply some of that as you move through your departments and as individual firefighters as well. We'll be putting up links to the Safety Stand Down, DripDrop, On the Job and Off, and the Lavender report on the NVFC's Share the Load behavioral program support as well. And the different links to Ali and Dr. Dolhun's Twitter accounts will be up as well. If you have any questions about this discussion or have a question for the panelists and we didn't get it, please email them in to Matthew Odom at matthew@nvfc.org. Again, I want to thank the panelists for your expertise and your sharing the information with the firefighters. We appreciate all you do and appreciate that you taking the time. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Nice meeting you, doctor, and thank you very much for what you do for us.
Thank you.